Hello, and welcome to another segment of Museum Moments. I'm Molly Dubin, the curator with the Jewish Museum Milwaukee, and I'm thrilled to be with you here on this lovely Friday for the final segment in a week-long exploration of some of the artists that were included in a 2015 Jewish Museum Milwaukee exhibition entitled Founders and Visionaries, Milwaukee Jewish Artists from the Milwaukee Art Museum. So earlier in the week, we spoke about Aaron Borod and Fred Berman, who I'm actually going to be revisiting a little bit today. Yesterday, we talked about Alfred Sessler, and today we are going to be talking about the beloved and prolific Joseph Friebert. So just to mention again, one of the primary themes of that exhibit was that these four individuals, these artists, all were fundamental in the development of the Wisconsin and the Milwaukee art scene and to the development of some of the organizations that are now our contemporary art pillars. All of them were also educators as well as artists, which is a nice theme that runs through everyone we've been talking about this week. So Joseph Friebert, the late art critic of the Milwaukee Journal, James Auer, when he was still alive and when Joe was still with us, called Joseph Friebert one of Wisconsin's greatest living treasures. And I think that's something many, many people agree with. I know my colleagues and I at the Jewish Museum Milwaukee definitely feel that way. Joe enjoyed a long and distinguished career. He became one of the state's leading artists and, as I mentioned, a beloved and also influential teacher. So thought I'd give you a little bit of a background. And with that, I'm going to segue us over into the PowerPoint here. Okay, so from the beginning, there we have Joe in his studio, and you can see some of his recognizable and many of the canvases, some of his recognizable works and the many pieces. He was prolific in terms of the output of his artwork. And there is a young Joe. So also in a studio. So I thought we'd give a little bit of background from this perspective. So Joseph was born in 1908 in Buffalo, New York. And when he was still very young, the family moved to Milwaukee, and that is where Joe spent the rest of his life living and working. And it was also often a subject of his artwork. He actually started out, his primary career was as a pharmacist, but he had always been interested in the arts. And so he started taking classes in the evenings while he was still working during the day. In the evenings, he was taking classes at the Layton School of Art. He eventually earned a degree in art education in 1945 from the Milwaukee State Teachers College. And then a Master of Fine Arts from UW-Madison. He joined the faculty of the Milwaukee State Teachers College following getting his master's, and that, of course, is now UWM, and he stayed there working until his retirement in 1976. I'm going to forward. There is Joe teaching to some very interested students. And I want to talk about some of his styles. Joe moved through several different styles, and that is really visible in the evolution of his work. So Joe really started working in a socialist realist style, and that was really a direct connection to how he felt about what he was seeing going on in the post-Depression era. This was a time when Americans were really struggling for work to support their families. And really throughout the 1930s and 40s, that socialist realist style comes to the forefront. You can see the melancholy. You can see that in, people depicted waiting in lines, or dilapidated buildings, or just forlorn landscapes, really. And here is one of those very telling pieces. This is called Two Lines, One Job from 1939. These are everyday people, and this is very fitting of the socialist realist style. And the palette very much reflects that. The way the figures tend to look like they're going on almost for infinity, the way that they move forward into the background, really demonstrating that these are long lines, hard times. The backs of these men, who you can see their backs are kind of slumping, their postures are slumping. They've been beaten down a little bit by the situation, and that's very much being reflected here. Some of those, dilapidated buildings, those kind of, really desolate landscapes. This is called Back Alley, also from 1939, and you can see that palette again reflected. It's almost this kind of shadow that falls over the canvases of this period, just giving this dark, melancholy feeling. It just really brings the viewer into what was palpable, certainly to Joe and so many others at the time. 1947, so a little bit later, but this is called The Lineup. Again, these individuals who are looking very forlorn, heads kind of bowed, hands in pockets, this feeling of uncertainty. And again, the palette very much reflects that. In the background here, and certainly in the figures, you start to see a little bit of these looser brush strokes, which Joe will start to lean more into a little bit later. This is a fascinating piece to me. This is called The Human Carnival from 1951. And it's interesting to me for a number of reasons. For many of you who may have had an opportunity to see the Chagall exhibit we had looking at the circus, and we had a companion exhibit looking at Wisconsin circus history. And we had a great lecture that was in collaboration with the David Barnett Gallery, and it really looked at the history of the circus within art. And this idea of the artists of this period, the modern artists of this period, really wanting to explore the grittier side of life, those people who were on the fringe. And of course, circus performers were very much seen as lesser than. They were not connected to society as we know it. And they were looked down upon, and you can really see that again here. And I think that's a fitting parallel to Joe's exploration of the post-Depression era, and wanting to really get down to the nitty-gritty of life, the underbelly, and the people that certainly here go out onto a stage to perform, but their lives may not reflect the joy that they're trying to bring to others. This is another piece that really reflects Joe's feelings about what was going on. He was always interested in, the social, political ails of society. Here are the refugees, 1964. Again, this dark palette. As you can imagine, this has some parallels to today, and that certainly one of the reasons that refugees were really looked down upon or not embraced is the feeling is that they were going to, take jobs away from Americans. So here you have these individuals, and again, their features are kind of blurred. You can't get a sharp feeling for their expression, but you definitely get the sense that they are there's concern, there's worry. They don't know what they're going to be expecting. They're, going to a new place. Will they be able to assimilate? Will they be able to get jobs? All of those things reflected in their kind of blurred faces. And again, that dark palette and this just kind of looking down over the precipice, wondering, what is to come, the path that we've chosen, where is that going to take us? So in the 1940s and 50s, Joe really started moving a little bit more into kind of more structural work where you have kind of more geometric shapes, these blocks. And that really is reflective of this being, the Cold War era. So again, there's this feeling of fear in America, uncertainty, the fear of job loss, the fear of foreign elements coming in and infiltrating, influencing culture and society. So he was very concerned about that, and that very much is reflected here. And this is actually the piece Storefronts and Cleaners, 1949 to 50, is a Milwaukee scene. And Joe really continued to have Milwaukee be a subject matter of his throughout his career. So this is a piece called Three Figures, and this really starts to show more of that, in the 60s, he's moving into a little bit more of that abstract style. We see those loose brush strokes. Here, these three figures, again, they are looking very forlorn. These are individuals who maybe are itinerant, we're not sure, but again, their faces kind of blurred, wondering, is this representative of the masses? So many are feeling forlorn, but you get to see that sense of abstraction coming on. So just wanted to show a picture from the gallery from the 2015 show, and in the center there, you can see the actual piece, Three Figures, on loan from the Milwaukee Art Museum. Okay, so before I get into talking about this piece here, I wanted to talk a little bit about, again, how prolific he was. Joe's work can actually now be found in 37 museums, not just in Wisconsin, but across the country. And through the partnership with the Kohler Foundation, it's actually a partnership between the Kohler Foundation and the Joseph Friebert and Betsy Ritz Friebert family collection, a number of pieces have been placed. And we've been lucky enough to be the recipient of a few of those, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the Museum of Wisconsin Art was actually gifted 67 pieces, and a few of the images that you saw earlier in the presentation were included in a fantastic retrospective that they did not all too long ago. So very exciting. In 2015, which again was when we had the show Founders and Visionaries, we were lucky enough to be the recipient of a piece that was gifted to us by Susan Rawson, the daughter of Joe Friebert and his wife, Betsy Ritz Friebert, also a well-known artist. She also was instrumental in our working with the Kohler Foundation to acquire some of the pieces. And this is one of those that came through that partnership. This is called Rabbis, 1938. And this, if it looks familiar at all, if you've spent any time at Congregation Shalom, you'll be familiar with this piece. This is a study for the mural there at Congregation Shalom. And this is the piece that Susan Rawson gave to the Jewish Museum Milwaukee that is now part of our permanent collection. And that leads me to just a mention and a correction I wanted to make from Monday's segment, which talked about Fred Berman and, of course, Aaron Borod as well. We had discussed a piece called Heads, which actually, Yes. No, this was by Alfred Sessler, which was donated to the museum also by Susan. That was the one that had the inscription to Joe and Betsy in the bottom and signed from Al Sessler. So I wanted to correct that. And the Berman connection I wanted to make, and I, as of course mentioned earlier in some of these broadcasts, these individuals were all friends and acquainted with one another, that 1956, we had said that there were 3 artists who were chosen to represent the Midwest at the Venice Biennale. Fred was one of those, as was Joe Friebert. So very, very exciting. Joe received a lot of awards and accolades throughout his career. And that really culminated with a 2009 award where he was the recipient of one of the Wisconsin Visual Art Lifetime Achievement Awards. So incredibly fitting. So this is really just a short dive into a very long and fruitful career and an amazing legacy, because he taught and inspired so many. If anybody is interested in learning more, we encourage you to visit joseph.friebert.com. And if you enjoyed today's segment and you are interested in donating to allow us to continue to bring you more content like this, we encourage you to visit our website, which is jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. So with that, I thank you for spending a few minutes with us learning about Wisconsin artists, and we will look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Thanks.